on what I should do in the classroom, and they said, well, whatever you know, you should only give 10% of what you know. The problem is, which 10%? So you still have to study the 100%. And what this workshop does for you is it gives you 120%, and whatever your contexts are, whatever you're going to be teaching, you'll pick out that 10% that will be just a phenomenal treat. What I want to deal with today, in an hour and a half, is really something that came when I sat in on the first workshop. Ken really started in the 19th century with Zionism. And when the Avichai Foundation wanted to sponsor it, they said, well, the story can go back further if you, depending on the frame you want to make. So Ken asked me if I would help with that. So I would like you all to stand up. You just sat down, okay. Okay? We're going to sing, if you know the words, it's fine. If not, it's also fine. We're going to sing the Hatikva together. Ready? Kol od balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homiach ulefate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia od lo avda tikvatenu ha-tikva bat shnot alpayim liyotam chofshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim liyotam chofshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim. Give yourself a round of applause. That was very good. So my basic question is, there have been great diasporic Jews. We had Rashi in 11th century France, Maimonides in 12th century Egypt, Dona Gracia in 16th century after the Spanish expulsion. She traveled the Mediterranean. I consider them to be pretty good Jews. So, if the Jewish soul, the Hatikva says, the Jewish soul yearns to come to the land, and that yearning is 2,000 years old. So if it's 2,000 years old, why did Zionism only develop in the 19th century? That's the question, the fundamental question we want to answer today, okay, in this afternoon session. Because I think it's important, because you're going to see sources from biblical period, from rabbinic period, from medieval period, cited by the Zionists, and yet the movement that we know, which is the national restoration of the Jewish people to the land, if it was supposed to be so long, why did it only happen in the 19th century? I think there are answers to that question. To some degree, the question I want to answer is, why did it not develop earlier? The 19th century has its own, you're going to learn about that during the week, but why did the Jewish people maintain a connection to the land, but never activate it, never realize it in the form of an actual movement? Yes, there were people who individually or in very small groups moved to the land, but there was never a mass movement. So the premise of today's talk, which is sort of the theoretical foundation that I want to leave you with, is that the relationship of the Jewish people to the land took different expressions over time. That in the first temple period, that relationship was simply a people in its land, very natural, very typical of the ancient Near East. The second temple period, which was a 600-year period, was different in that now this is all in your binders or whatever. I mean, not the full PowerPoint, but most of the slides. Right? The land is the center, even though there are Jews now throughout the Mediterranean and also beyond the Near East. The view is the land is the center of the Jewish people. In the post-temple period, it's land as messianic hope. And that's what we're going to be spending the latter part of our time together focused on. And in the modern period, so I leave that to Ken and his excellent staff to develop that with you over the next 5 days. So I'm trying to make this easier for you to sort of digest. So there's a first part and then a second part to the talk. Because you've had a break and dinner's at 6, I don't want to keep you from that, so I think we're going to compress them. But in the first part, we're going to focus on this Bayit Rishon, the first temple period, and the second temple period. So we'll focus on that in part 1. And then, and just underneath, you see the various powers that were in control of the land. And then in the second part, we're going to be focused on after the destruction of the second temple, which for some of you may be aware, on the Hebrew calendar, that period of mourning, the destruction of the second temple, is coming up starting next Sunday. Okay? Because I know people like to have great resources, you're all teachers, as am I. This is a great book. All the maps from today's presentation are from this book. It's a great coffee table book or a great bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah book. All right? No, that's what if I like them. It's very expensive. So it's a very worthwhile thing. So you could get all the maps from there. Okay? All right. And this is going to be the key point, but I need to build up to that, so I'm going to ask for your patience. I want to leave you today with 3 core concepts, but we're going to have to build to that. We're going to be needing some biblical texts. Do you have that do you have ways of getting that? Somebody from the internet? That works too, right? So I want to develop this idea of covenant by asking you to break up into groups of 2. Good chavruta, this is very classical Jewish learning. I want you to read only essentially 2 passages from chapter 12 in Genesis and Breshit, verses 1 to 3, as well as verse 7. And then again, chapter 13, verses 14 to 17. And I want you to answer these 2 questions. You have 3 minutes, so sit together. What is God's promise to Abram? And what does Abram have to do in order for God to fulfill the promise? Okay? Does everybody have the 2 questions? What is God's promise? And does Abram have to do anything in order to get for God to deliver on the promise? Okay? 3 minutes. Chavruta. Okay. We don't have a lot of time, so let's go. Okay. Based on... I'm from the Phil Donahue School of Presentations. Okay. Now I know who's above a certain age. Okay. Okay. Perek Yud Bet, chapter 12. Okay. What is the promise? I want volunteers and name. Okay, your name? Amalia. So one at each one at a time. Go ahead.
Okay, so you say to him,
okay, so okay, great nation. Oh, there's a beautiful room here full of people. Thank you, Amalia. Okay. Okay, others. Come on. It's all the text. It's right up there. What else? Huh? Yes. Your name? Megan.
Yes, and I will bless you.
Bless you. Okay, I will bless you. I think I'm going to look for a darker marker here. Okay, I will bless you. Any idea what bless means, Megan? Oh. Protect. Okay. And when you bless your children on Friday nights, you just want them protected. Okay, that's nice. Okay. All right. Thank you, Megan. Okay. Okay, this really is. Okay, what else is in the promise? Your name? Julie.
I was just saying, I think bless here is to give stuff.
To give stuff. Material, spiritual, or material? Okay. So this is like America. Okay, we get things. Free stuff. Okay. What? Oh, okay, thank you. I went to a Hawks game with my kid. I'm not into sports, but he drags me. And like they said, free stuff, and everybody's going, yeah. So I don't think that necessarily it's, he wanted Abraham to like, oh yeah. But he did want, we'll see if he wanted him to do anything. Other things that God is promising. Your name? Ella. Okay, you'll be famous. Look at fame, fortune. Like this is just, it goes all the way back. This is the first game show. Okay, so... No, but it's interesting to me that you're focusing on very physical things. Very physical things. Is there anything else in there that... yes. Your name? Laura. Oh. Now does that come from this passage? Or more from chapter 13, right? No, that's okay. All I have is a clicker. You're just a click away. All right, so in chapter 13, right, there is going to be seed, but I want to point out that when he does get into the land, according to the account in Breshit, according to Genesis, in verse 7, I got to learn how to use this, right? God appears to him and says, unto your seed I will give this land. That's part of the promise, right? It's not just material. He's getting a land. You will be a blessing. So I would consider that, okay, you will be it's Amalia, right? You'll be a blessing. Okay. So now my big question is, does Abram have to do anything to earn this? Okay? Okay. Name? Sam? He has to go. Okay, that's pretty good. Go and then all this will happen. It's a sign of faith. It's a sign of faith. He has to give up his parents. Okay. But once he gets there, Sam, he gets it. Don't tell me what you know. Tell me what the text says.
I know that. Because the text in the next paragraph says that he has to walk.
Okay, so that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so our chapter 13 that we heard from, what was your name again? Laura? Right? So Laura pointed out that by the end, it says, look as far as you can see, north, south, east, and west. This is the land that I'm going to give to you and your seed, and they're going to be numerous. So there's also numerous children. Okay? Right? Lots of them. And it does seem to be, so I just want to ask you, I guess linguistically or stylistically, if Abram didn't walk the land, would he not get all this? Or is he saying, this is yours? Yeah, you just bought this house, take a walk, Or is it conditional? Like if you don't walk it, you won't get it. What do you think? You don't think it's conditional. It doesn't have the feel, right? Okay, so this is the chapter 13. And in fact, by the way, for the man who was supposed to walk the land, what does he do in verse 18? He doesn't. He settles in Hebron. Okay? And it doesn't seem like the promise is compromised. So if we just got God's promise, we just have to move because we only have an hour and a half. Land, multitude of descendants, great nation. Right? A lot of you, we have a great name, blessing for other nations. Right? Those who bless Abram will be blessed. Blessing is a big thing here, although you said it was material, but I don't know if it's only material here. Clearly, when it talks about this, it's probably something more. But the core elements are land and descendants. land and descendants. You're going to have a lot of kids, ultimately, and they will live in this land. Okay? That's the story. That seems to be the covenant of Abram. Now, I want you to continue with your fingers doing the walking in Tanakh. Look up Genesis chapter 26, verses 1 to 5. I'll make it easy. Okay? How about this? The middle section does Isaac, and the two ends do Jacob, just to save time. Okay? Okay? Again, what is the relationship of Abraham's descendants to the land? See if you can find that in the text. Okay? The sources are up there. It's also in your binders. Just want to say hi. Okay? Let's ask somebody from the middle whom we haven't heard from. Who wants to? What is, according to Genesis 26, Perek Chavav, what is Yitzchak's relationship with the land? Same promise. What does he have to do? He has to stay there. He definitely has to stay there. What is promised? Exactly the same thing. The children, the land, right? All of those key elements are promised to him. Okay, this side, what about Jacob? Same. Okay, so when the Torah repeats itself, when any biblical text repeats itself, that's the way of saying something in italics. Right? They didn't have italics in the ancient world, so they just repeat it to show you, like, notice me, like this. I'm trying to say this because it's really important. Okay? So, if you look at these texts that we just examined over the last 10 minutes, the relationship of the Jewish people, of Abram's descendants, to the land is eternal, right? There's no time limit, and it is unconditional. Meaning, yes, the Avot may have to do something. Isaac is not allowed to leave. Jacob left, and he came back, right? But it's not presented as bitnai. It's not dependent on the behavior of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's children. Everybody agree with that? Seems reasonable? Let's go a little further. So if I sum it up, what I call the Triadic covenant. No, this is not the half of the Star of David. It's not not Franz Rosenzweig lurking in the background. Okay, this is God, land, and people is what we call the Triadic covenant of the Avot. But there's another covenant in the Torah. The 5 books of Moses include another covenant between the Jewish people and God. And I ask you, please, to turn to Shmot, Exodus chapter 19, verses 3 to 6. Please do that. Okay? And you have 2 questions. Everybody do it together. Again, b'chavruta. Please, I encourage you to do this with your students as well. What is the promise? And what do the people have to do in order to receive the promise? My same questions that I gave you to Abram. Okay? 2 minutes. 4 verses. 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Let's hear from some new voices. Okay? What is the promise? Okay, we'll do this just to make it different. Okay? So, what is the Sinai promise? Somebody, hands up, come on. Okay, name. Rebecca. Okay, so some kind of special relationship. This is the Sinai. So special relationship, but Rebecca said that already. Right? The special relationship with God. Right? Right, with God. And what do they have to do? They have to keep the commandments. All right? Ushmartem. You have to observe. You have to observe? What happens if they don't observe? Right? It's a fair question. What happens if they don't observe? A bigger question is, what happens when they lose their clicker? What did I do with it? Okay. All right. So, okay. You will be a nation of priests, holy nation, but you have to keep the terms of the covenant. Okay? And that is exactly what the text says. It's really beautiful. It's poetic. We read it on Shavuot. But now let's see. Turn to Leviticus 18. We're really hopping through the Torah here. Okay? Chapter 18 of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. Right? 24 to 30. One of our longer passages, about 7 verses. What does God expect of the people in this passage? And what are the consequences? Hey! Shh! Let's hear from the left. We always, right, we lean to the right. Okay? We lean to the left on Passover. What does the left side of the room say? What does God expect of the people? Somebody here. Ezra. Ezra's going to speak.
Okay, so he's saying don't defile the land. Everybody that came before you defiled it. Don't be like that. The land
Right. And what is this notion of defilement? It's actually in the text. Right? Right? What it says. What is the... Exactly. It says that these behaviors, these activities. If you read back and the rest of chapter 18, it's read on the afternoon of Yom Kippur in many congregations. If you do what they did, what's the consequence? Right? Remember, we don't say punishment. It's consequences. Right? No. Okay? The consequences are you will be kicked out. Now, I want to go a little bit further. Who's the example of being kicked out of the land? No, it says, who's going to be kicked out? The Canaanite nations. It says that the ones who are there now, I'm kicking them out because this is the way they behave. You don't want to do the same thing because you'll get kicked out too. When the other nations got, quote unquote, kicked out, did they ever come back? So, what is God implying in this passage? No, actually, I think there's no chance. In other words, the fate of these nations awaits you if you don't keep my Sinai covenant of the commandments. So, do not behave as the local Canaanites do or as the Egyptians did. And the consequences are exile, just like the native population. I shouldn't even say exile, it's really expulsion. Right? That's the better word, expulsion. Vomit. Right? If you're not a ruminant, it really means it's like it's gone. Okay? So, which is it? If the Triadic covenant is between God, the law, and the people, and if they violate the law, that's the end. And there's exactly no land. But the other covenant was what? Eternal and unconditional. This one is conditional. So which is it? Will the real Brit please stand up? The Torah itself reconciled the two covenants. And I have to ask you to read. Again, we'll split it up. Let the middle section read the Leviticus passage. The ends, please read Deuteronomy. And we'll focus on the ends. Okay? Only in the interest of time, I would love to do all the passages, but let's look at the side. Deuteronomy chapter 30. How do the two covenants merge? Rebecca, we heard from you already. Let's hear from somebody else. Got your name? Sharon? Okay, so there's a new frame for the two covenants. What is eternal about the people and the land? The possibility. Not that they will stay in the land forever, but as opposed to the Canaanites, where their behavior forfeited their title or their deed, if you will, to the land. For the Jewish people, the Sinai covenant that we said before, they have to observe. If they don't observe, they are kicked out. But according to Deuteronomy, Vishavta, you shall return. Right, verses 1 and 2. Thou shalt be thinking that Hashevota el levavecha, you'll come back to your heart. Vishavta ad Hashem Elokecha, you shall return to the Lord your God. And what will God do to you? Verse 3, and God will return you from captivity and bring you back to the land. Even if you're far away, he'll gather you up. If he brought you far to distant lands, he'll bring you back to the land of Israel. So according to the biblical idea, and this is what's very, very important for the First Temple period because they didn't experience it this way exactly. The fusion of the covenant is now, the land of Israel is not the promise, it's the arena of the promise. The promise is that special relationship with God that was announced at Sinai. Where do you have that special relationship most intensely, most fully, most creatively? That's when you're in the land. If you violate the terms of the covenant, right, then you can be exiled, but exile gives at least the opportunity to come back. So what is eternal? The relationship with God and the possibility of repentance and the chance to return. That is the way the biblical promise or covenant with the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the Sinai covenant made with the Jewish people in the book of Exodus, that is how they are fused. Now we're going to do a quick run through history. Tribal Israel, right, we know the stories in the book of Judges. They're having a rough time. Basically, sin, right? Supplication, plead to God after some suffering, and then salvation. And God will send a judge. He'll send Deborah. He'll send Ehud. He'll send Samson, and try to help you out. David's kingdom. First there's Saul, then there's David. It seems like the covenant is being fulfilled. Again, these maps come from the historical atlas. Pretty extensive territory. Solomon has it. Then the Jews, according to the books, the two books of Kings, 1 and 2, they unfortunately embrace idolatry. The Assyrians come and conquer the northern kingdom, which was 10 tribes, and exile them in 722 BCE. Judah is a vassal state in a much larger Assyrian empire. Then the Babylonians come, and there's a rebellion, and the temple is destroyed, and the Jews are exiled. The Jews are exiled in 586 BCE, and the script, according to the ancient Near East, was by Judahites. But 50 years later, the Persians come and conquer the Babylonians, and Cyrus says, Jews, you can go back to your land. Suddenly, all of that biblical material came to life. Like, he really meant it. It wasn't just a sort of empty promise. And I'm sure there were many Jews who thought it was over. but a whole group of Jews believed that indeed what the Torah said is the fact. The Jews, no matter how badly they behave, they can get that time out. I don't want to see you. Go to your room. Go to Babylonia. 50 years, I've cooled off. Okay, you can come home. Okay, the prodigal son, so to speak. And the Persian Empire, says to the Jews, really from the descendants of the tribe of Judah, you can go back to your land. Really small province. It's one of 127 provinces. You know the first verse of the book of Esther, right? Okay, so it's 127 provinces. It's called the province of Yehud. That's the Persian name. Yehud, making the residents there Yehudim. That's where it comes from. Okay? The Persian, the return under Cyrus. And for 200 years, it's a small vassal state. That is its size. It's landlocked. It's maybe like 36 by 25 miles. It's really not big. What is at the center of the province of Yehud? Jerusalem, with a temple and a high priest. And I need to tell you, this is a goosebump moment. I have usually 2 or 3. But 20 years ago, Emory has a museum that brought the exhibit of the Elephantine Papyri. The Elephantine Papyri. 2,500 years ago, the 5th century BCE, in Persia, this says Elephantine. It was an outpost of the Persian Empire, a garrison. Who lived there? Jews. And we have their papyri that you can read in Hebrew. And they wrote to the high priest in Jerusalem, how do we observe Passover? And I was able, my kids are in day school, they were able to read a papyrus from 2,500 years ago. Okay? I also discovered that 2,500 years ago, they had not yet invented spaces between words. So they were really struggling there, but okay. But it was that was the beginning of what? Land as center. You could be a Jew in Elephantine, and you followed the commandments as they were understood at the time, according to different understandings, but you didn't have to live in Yehud to be a Yehudi. I have no idea what was on their passport. Please don't ask me. That has not survived. But the Persian Empire was constructed such that you had to see yourself affiliated with a province. You could be an expatriate. You didn't have to live there, but you were not, I'm a citizen of the world. I'm a citizen of the Persian Empire. No such thing. You, right, your driver's license is Georgia. Wherever you go in the United States, if you show, right, when you go to foreign countries, you show your U.S. passport. But when you're in America, you got to show your Georgia license. So a Jew in Egypt could show, here's my Judahite license. Right? I am a member of this province even though I don't live there. The Second Temple period was the first time the Jews began to develop this idea that you could be connected to the land, to a territory, without being a resident. That was the uniqueness of the Second Temple period. Okay? Over the course of the Persian Empire's sovereignty or dominance, the Jews start to expand where they lived, not only in Egypt, but back here in Mesopotamia, up here in Asia Minor, and even into Greece. the Jews are expanding because now there was a way to hold on to their identity. I didn't have to live, whereas in the first temple period, the people were in their land. Philistines were in Philistia. Of course, you could go out for business, whatever, but you were primarily there. In the second temple period, under Persia and then under Greece, the concept of, I know who I am, but I don't have to live there, was introduced. Okay? So this is the second key concept of our afternoon session. The land is now it's enough for it to be the center of our, so to speak, spiritual lives, but we don't have to be in residence. Okay? This is not to be confused with online learning. Okay? Just letting you know that's not the exact same thing. But you saw that temple in Jerusalem. The Jews of Elephantine wrote to the high priest in Jerusalem. They didn't appoint their own priest and say, what should we do? They wrote to the high priest in Jerusalem and said, how should we observe Passover? Okay? The Jewish identity in the diaspora begins to evolve and flourish along multiple lines that allows them to live in Greece, in Turkey, again, these are contemporary territories, in Iraq, Iran, in Jordan, and in Egypt. There's the Machzir HaShekel, the half. Emory also had an exhibit of stuff from the Israel Museum, and tons of half shekels that were shipped to Jerusalem every year by communities around the Mediterranean. And they were exempt from tariffs. Tell that to somebody. Okay. No, it was really protected. It had real escorts to make sure nobody touched it. In other words, I may be living in Alexandria, it's now the Greek times, I may be living in Alexandria, but my half shekel means I have a stake, I have a little piece of that which is going on in the Jerusalem temple. It's the center of my Jewish life, even if I don't get there that often. I will try to make it pilgrimage. You read the New Testament, you know that Jews would flock to Jerusalem at the time of Passover. According to Josephus, a different historian, he actually claims that Sukkot was the more popular pilgrimage festival than Passover. The calendar of the Jews was set in Israel, sort of because you have a solar lunar calendar, kind of fused calendar, so that unites world Jewry. And under the Persians in particular, the idea of the Bible becoming the constitution of the Jewish people. And why would this be? Why did the Torah come to be under Ezra the scribe and his followers, those who came after him? You read Nehemiah in the Tanakh. Why did the Bible become the constitution of the Jews? Because the special relationship. We got kicked out because we didn't keep it. Nehemiah says they didn't keep Shabbat. Isaiah says because of the way they mistreated the widow, the poor, the orphan, right? Jeremiah gives other reasons, idolatry. There were many reasons, but everybody said it's because we violated this book. And Persia said, you have to be autonomous. You can't have your own king, but you have to be autonomous. So Ezra makes the Torah, the constitution of at least Jewry of Yehud, and whether it's agricultural laws or performances in the temple, or whatever, cities of refuge, the point is you walked around the land and you saw the covenant. That's what Ezra wanted. He thought this could happen again. Our ancestors were kicked out. We don't want to get kicked out. But it wasn't meant to be. Okay? So what happened was the law was starting to supplant land as a key component of our triad. Now you could have a religious connection to the land mediated through the law. You did not have to have sovereignty. You did not have to reside in the land. Okay, the Greek Empire at its height, and the Jews are still here. Now the Greek name is Judea, that's how we know it. It's more common. And Jerusalem, still a small territory, relatively speaking, but the Greeks had a different idea, but we'll get to that in a minute. Persian Empire, Greek Empire. When are we ever going to get back a Jewish king? We read the Torah, we read the prophets. They predict a return to the land that will be glorious, but it's not happening. And that's the third key concept. That's the last one for the afternoon, and that is Messianism. The third key concept is a notion of pushing off the promises that are in the Torah, that are in the prophets, that they will come to be, they're just not going to be here right away. Gershom Scholem, a great scholar of Jewish mysticism, refers to two types of Messianism: restorative, which brings back a united, independent kingdom of a scion of David, and that would mean by human initiative, while others advocated a utopian, supernatural, divine-initiated Messianism. And we have both of these during the Second Temple period. Those who thought the Jews had to bring it about, those who thought God was going to bring it about, right, top down or bottom up. Those are the two. And the Maccabees, right, under a particular Greek king who seemed to say to them, I want you to be religious the way we're religious. I want you to sacrifice to our gods. I'm going to set up statues in the temple. I want you to eat pork. I don't want you to circumcise your kids. I want you to be Greek. That's the best way to be. And we want you, as a member of our empire, to be fully Greek. A small group of Jews says, we know what happens when we start following statues and eating pork. Right? We read the book. We know how it ends. It doesn't end well. So they figured, we're going to die because we violated God's covenant. So we may as well die trying to become sovereign again and controlling our destiny so that we could be religious the way we want to be. It was the first really religious revolution. It had political overtones, but clearly as you read both 1 and 2 Maccabees, it's a religious revolution. They make an independent state, lasts for about 100 years. The Romans come in 63 BCE. They have a kind of oversight or supervision. That's when Herod, shortly after Herod is made king, and it's a vassal kingdom. There's a lot of building going on. Then there's direct Roman administration after the year 6. And then, unfortunately, the Jews rebel, again, the year 66. And so we have a destroyed temple. We're going to focus on this. We usually had a break, but Rich guarantees me that you have it within you, the stamina to make it till 6. So we're going to, I just want to sort of summarize quickly. We had the two notions of covenant, eternal on the one hand and conditional on the other. We reconciled them by making the land as the arena of the covenant. The first temple was typified by the Jews as a nation in its land, and the second temple was land as center for a diasporic Jewry, but there's also messianic agitation within the land. What we're going to do for the rest of our time this evening is talk about what's the next stage. What happens after 70? And it's a very, very important story, and we have to slow it down. If we did roughly 1,000 years in 50 minutes, we're now going to spend our last 40 minutes in a very small period of time. Okay, so here's the Jewish War, 66 to 73. Masada falls in 73. There were Jewish revolts in Egypt and North Africa in 117. The Bar-Kochba Revolt is 132. 135, the revolt is finally suppressed, and then there's about a decade of the Hadrianic persecutions. The Emperor Hadrian says, I've had enough of these Jews. If anybody recalls the account that we read in many synagogues on Yom Kippur of the 10 martyrs, the 10 martyrs are during this period, during the Hadrianic persecutions. You know, Rabbi Akiva, right? The skin is pulled, I don't have to go into it. Okay. Right? So we're going to slow it down dramatically, but because we have a very, very important story to tell. Okay? The Jewish revolt, right, was in 66. The red lines are what the Romans come and they finally conquer Jerusalem. Right? They besiege it. They break through on the 17th of Tammuz. They destroy the temple 3 weeks later. Right? Jerusalem is destroyed in the year 70, and Masada falls in 73. So now let's quickly sketch the historical situation. The demographics, we've got Jews throughout the empire. Only the Jews in Judea rebelled. There wasn't widespread rebellion throughout the empire. Okay? So the land and the temple had been the center of the diaspora. Jerusalem is destroyed. Okay? What do the people do now that the temple is gone? Suggestions? Synagogues. So Amaya says synagogues. Huh? The rabbinical, right? We'll see. It's not everybody thinks the rabbis should be the leaders. Yeah. Absolutely, a very important book by Seth Schwartz, Imperialism and Jewish Society. He says that many, many Jews just said, it's over, it's done, time to give up, and they just became regular Romans. Okay? Before we talk about what they did, what's the goal? What would you say the goal is? Huh? To connect with God. You're back to Sinai, aren't you? Right? Okay? It's all about that relationship with God. But you've got hundreds of thousands of Jews still there. Many were killed. Many were sold as slaves. You still have Jews throughout the empire, and you have a remnant in the land. What's your goal? So you say connect to God. What else? You don't have a center, yes? Okay, what's your name? Karen. Karen or Karen? Karen. Okay, so Karen says you want a portable Judaism. Now, just want to remind you, it's the year 71, okay? It's been a year since the temple's been destroyed. Jews have had a temple for the last 1,000 years, except for 50 years. And you say, okay, let's just make it portable. You're done with the temple. Yeah. So I think you're not telling the story of 71. I think you're telling the story another century, because they have to learn that. Yes, your name? Anna? Hi. Well, they are there, right? Some of them are there. There's that. Okay, so you want to get back to the status quo ante, right? Okay, we know, again, go back to the story. We know the script. Okay, we did the wrong things. He's angry at us. He sends the Romans. We know the story. Okay? The goal is keep the people together and united and still wanting to come back. Still wanting to build that temple. Still wanting to establish the way it was, to restore it. Okay? Now I'll use, what's your name? Nurit? So Nurit's suggestion of a relationship to God, I'll actually say it was more probably sociological in the sense of, right, standardized practice. Let the way we all observe, let it be consistent. We can't have a lot of diversity because then it's hard to keep people together. Emory University has a very unique relationship with the Tibetan Buddhists, and especially the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama comes to Emory every 3 years and teaches a course. So, if you have anybody read The Jew and the Lotus, you know that he wants to know, they say Yitzhak Greenberg went with 9 other Jews to meet the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama said, I was thinking maybe we should have, a confirmation thing, like you study Tibetan history and then we test them and they pass the test. He says, No, we tried that. It doesn't work. Try something else. And like I said, well, he gave several suggestions, and just right now this is not working so well. So it's very interesting. I was on the ed staff of a summer camp, and Tibetan Buddhist monks wanted to come and observe the camp to learn how do you keep young people connected to a land that they may not, this is 1970s, they may not be connected to, never visited, right? The Tibetan children, grandchildren now, never went to Tibet. So it's a very interesting thing. So one of the techniques is to standardize practice, right? Remember, whenever you are faced with a new situation, you don't come up with the great new idea. You don't want something, the total break from the past. You look for what's available. You look for the nearest thing and you say, what's been working? Well, Jews in Alexandria have a connection. If we can multiply that, we can hold on. So there's going to be an emphasis on the religious connection to the land. So Nurit, there's something about this idea about God, but it's still, you'll see, we'll focus it on the land. All right? Right? But if it's going to be strictly halacha, Eli, can you help pass out those 2 white boxes, please? Thank you. What about the land? We may not have time to spend it as much as I wanted, but you'll have the texts. Okay? If you look through I'll put it up on the board in a second, but you're also going to get a handout. If you look at 6 benedictions from the Amidah, the rabbis wanted Jews to say it at least twice a day. Later on it became 3 times, but initially twice a day in lieu of the sacrifices. But when you're reading the prayers, listen, let's look at the prayers, okay? Maybe a little hard to see. It's being distributed. Okay? The first one, it's in the middle of the prayer. Sound the great shofar for our freedom. Lift up the banner to bring our exiles together. Blessed art thou, O Lord, who gatherest the dispersed of thy people Israel. Okay? Kibbutz galuyot, right? Bring them together. Next one. You're all getting copies of this. Restore our judges as at first, and our counselors as at the beginning. Remove from us sorrow and sighing. Reign thou alone over us, O Lord. Blessed art thou, King who lovest righteousness and justice. Okay? Everybody, is that? Oh, they have that, right? They have that. Are there handouts that say the Amidah? Okay, that's the key. That's the one. I didn't know it was in the box. I thought that was in the box. Okay. Okay. Okay, we have a lot to do still, so we're going to move. Okay. The third one is, it says slanders, but it's basically destroy the wicked and raise up the humble. The remnant of the sages, preserve them. Return in mercy to Jerusalem and speedily bring a son or descendant of David to be the Messianic king. In other words, you want to remain connected to the land? Pray every day for the restoration of national life. I love doing this with some of my students when I taught in day school many years ago. Right? Write down what you would pray for. So in my class it was good grades, but it would be for health, it would be for material comfort, right? That was the basics. They didn't yet kind of imagine that they have a stake in Jewish dreams. They didn't think of that. And what the rabbis who crafted this prayer is that we want you every day to, if there is no national life in the land anymore, we want you to be praying for it every day. That's how you preserve the vision. Okay? You eat a meal with bread. What are the blessings on Birkat ha-Mazon. We're not going to do the Birkat here, okay? But in each of these two blessings, just quickly, this is the second one. It's in Hebrew. I put it in, but you have it in English in the handout. Al ha'aretz ve'al ha-Mazon. Right, we thank you, God, for bequeathing to our ancestors a beautiful, wonderful land. Every time you eat, you're talking about a land that you don't eat from. Just think about it. It's not just grace like you thank God. You're not just thanking God for the food. That was the first blessing. All right, Hazanat HaKol. The second one is, God, we thank you. Look at what you do. You say, they quote a verse, as it says in Deuteronomy, you will eat, you'll be satisfied, and you'll bless God for the beautiful land that he gave you. Talk about the land in prayer, after your food. The third blessing is rebuild Jerusalem. You say that, you could sing it. The kids sometimes don't know what they're saying, but if you really pay attention to the words, look, God, have mercy on what? On Israel, your people, on Jerusalem, your city, on Zion, the dwelling place of your glory, on the Davidic line, on the great house of your name, which is the temple. So thank you, God, for the land as an inheritance, which means we'll eventually get it, and have mercy on Jerusalem, Israel, Davidic monarchy, Zion, and temple. Even when you go under the canopy for the marriage blessings, this is again in your handout, the contents of the fifth and seventh blessings, right? Sos tasis v'tagel akara b'kibbutz baner. Right? Oh, it's so wonderful. This man and woman have gotten together. Isn't it wonderful? Yes, but there's another couple that is still separated, the Jewish people and the land. Under the chuppah, you're remembering that we're not living in an ideal world. Right? The long blessing that is often sung, who created happiness and gladness, chatam v'kala, all these wonderful words. What do you want? Please, God, speedily may it be heard again in the cities of Judah and in the outskirts of Jerusalem. Right? The sound of joy, the sound of gladness, the sound of the groom and bride. And that's actually recited under the canopy. Okay? So, gladden Zion and her children to bring them back. In other words, they're going to use the tools of prayer, of celebration, to remind Jews that they are still connected to the land, even though that's not the reality. Remember, we're in the year 71. There's also the negative side. Remember the destruction, fast days, doing things in the temple's memory. We're going to stake, Yochanan ben Zakkai established that they're going to take the lulav all 7 days in their synagogues, just like they did in the temple. Doing things to remember the temple's destruction. Leave the corner of your house unfinished. In other words, surround yourself with cues, with mnemonics, with references to Israel and to the temple. So immediately after 70, going back to Karen's, you're not just going to make it portable. You're actually going to keep the people spiritually connected to maintain the land as a center so that they will be able to come back. When? We don't know. But it'll probably be how long? Yeah, 50 years. Why? Because that's how long the last time out was. Right? Teacher's not going to come up with a totally new punishment. I can read the consequences on the wall. 50 years once. All right. So 600 years, we need another time out. It's fine. We can handle it. What do the people expect to happen soon? That the temple will be rebuilt. There's no right? We'll find the right Roman emperor. We'll pay him off. We'll give him something, tribute. Right? We'll get the right one in the right mood, and we'll get the temple back. That's how it happened. Or maybe, God will send another Cyrus or something like that. So why do the people believe this? Because it happened before. That's the key, folks. It happened before. Okay? So the survival strategy is hang on. Not dramatic changes. Not revolutionary revision of Judaism, but use the tools that are available and emphasize the centrality of the land. Okay? Will that work? Revolt against Trajan in the year 115. It started over here. You could see over here in northern Egypt. Okay? Jews were deeply involved. We still have this. It's a milestone over here in North Africa. And it says this milestone was made 3 years after the Jewish revolt. It was called the Jewish Revolt, and we know from the rest of the milestone that it was around the year 115 to 117. So the revolt was in North Africa, but then the Bar-Kochba Revolt came. This is when the Jews of the land said, aha! The Messianism that we spoke about, we can do it. We can bring it about. It's roughly 50, 60 years since the destruction. Now's the time. We're going to find an opportunity. And this is from the great Roman historian Cassius Dio. At Jerusalem, Hadrian founded a city in place of the one which had been razed to the ground, naming it Aelia Capitolina, and on the site of the temple of the Jewish god, he raised a new temple to Jupiter. This brought on a war of no slight importance, nor of brief duration, for the Jews deemed it intolerable that foreign races should be settled in their city and foreign religious rites planted there. So long, indeed, as Hadrian was close by in Egypt and again in Syria, they remained quiet, okay? And they made bad weapons for the Romans, right? But when Hadrian went farther away, they openly revolted. In other words, now's the time. And who was their model? Who was the model of a few fighting? Exactly, the Maccabees. They would succeed because the Maccabees did it, and God helped the few against the many, the weak against the strong. We can do it as well, okay? Except didn't work out that way. At first, the Romans took no account of them. Soon, however, all Judea had been stirred up, and the Jews everywhere were showing signs of disturbance, were gathering together, giving evidence of great hostility to the Romans, partly by secret, partly by overt acts. Many outside nations, too, were joining them through eagerness for gain, jump on the bandwagon, and the whole earth, one might almost say, was being stirred up over the matter. Then indeed Hadrian sent against them his best generals, he names them. Severus did not venture to attack his opponents in the open at any one point in view of their numbers and their desperation, but by intercepting small groups, thanks to the number of his soldiers and his under-officers, by depriving them of food and shutting them up, he was able, rather slowly to be sure, but with comparatively little danger, to crush, exhaust, and exterminate them. Folks, read these results. I don't even have to read it out loud. This is by and even if there is some exaggeration, just digest these numbers. It's outside Jerusalem. 580,000 were slain. Hadrian made Judea, if I could borrow a term from the 20th century, Judenrein. No Jew was allowed into Jerusalem, even to visit the Temple Mount, the destroyed Temple Mount. Okay? Many wolves and hyenas rushed howling into their cities, exactly the way Leviticus and Deuteronomy predicted. Okay? It's 135. Land is in ruins. There's no more population in the center part of the country. Now what options do you have for survival? Okay? And this is the main point of our time together today. You still want to keep the people united so that they will be able to return, and they'll do the things that God will give them the chance to return. But you've got to reduce the messianic agitation. It can't be that as soon as there's a little vulnerability in Rome, the Jews rush in and have another revolt. It doesn't work. And it leaves such devastation in its wake. It's just plain irresponsible for anybody who wants to see a future jury to think that this strategy will work. So you remember we said two types of Messianism. Bar-Kochba thought he would be the human initiative. He would be the standard bearer. He would be the leader of the revolt that would overthrow Rome and make Judea sovereign again. He was wrong. What kind of Messianism do the leaders now opt for, primarily the rabbis? Utopian. This one, they're going to punt upstairs. God, it's in your hands. When you're ready to bring us back, you take care of it. Okay? You've got a heck of a bigger playbook than we do. Right? You control a lot more of this world than we do. If it's that important, you'll know the right time. Right? And now you're right. That it's all about the relationship with God. That is how, right, we will not do the war. Right? Now you can also see why suddenly the Haggadah becomes, God, you'll do all the battling for us. We'll be loyal to you, and you will liberate us. Okay? So give priority to utopian messianism. God acts, supernatural, miraculous, and they talk about it. Oh, it's going to be amazing, and God's going to come down, and angels. All of that talk starts to come out in the 2nd century, and the people are basically told, be passive. This is not your fight. Your fight, going back to Anna, right? You connect with God, that's the most important thing. And theology. Why did this happen to us? Because the Romans are SOBs? No. Because we sinned. That's from the Torah. That was the first temple. So if we really want to come back to the land, what do we have to do? Be more religious. Follow the covenant. Be stricter. The biblical notion of covenant comes up again. Calamity befalls us due to our actions. How will we get deliverance? How will we get salvation? Right? What did Deuteronomy say? When you return to your heart and you return to my laws, then I will return you. This is rabbinic theology. So then, how do we come back to the land? By repenting. Not by returning to God and abandoning sin. Hanukkah needed a makeover. Right? No, if it already inspired the great revolt of 66 to 73, and it inspired another Bar-Kochba Revolt, right, just 60 years later, we've got to change the way people experience and understand the miracle of Hanukkah. Al-Hanisim, which was in the original prayer, we view this prayer as being authored while the Second Temple was still standing. The whole thing talks about the weak against the strong and all of that, the few against the many. And thereafter your children came to the Holy of Holies, cleansed your temple, purified, kindled lights, and they established these 8 days of Hanukkah to express thanks and to praise your great name. But the emphasis is on the battle. You in your great mercy stood up for them. You took up their grievance. You delivered the strong into the hands of diligent students, and you made a great and holy name for yourself. Right? And for your people, Israel, you worked a great victory. Okay? In the passage of the Talmud, for when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils. Right? Oh, and the Hasmoneans, by the way, defeated them. Then they made a search. The oil, the miracle of the oil, moves into the center of the understanding of what happened at Hanukkah. And so we go from Maccabean revolt to, 8 days, the oil lasting for 8 days. Right? I'm not saying they didn't have, but it's a question of shift of emphasis. Right? Now, I'm giving you a bit of a foreshadowing. What did the 19th and early 20th century Zionists want to do with Hanukkah? Go back. Mi yimalel gvurot Yisrael otam mi yivneh. Hein bechal dor yakum hagibor go el ha'am. No, not God. Right? A warrior will stand up. They want to go back to that image. Forget this 8-day miracle. That's not the point of Hanukkah. The Zionists want to kind of leapfrog over the rabbinization of the connection of Jews to Israel and make it more about what they thought was important. How will Jerusalem be rebuilt? This is a prayer recited on Tisha B'Av. Look at this, I'll just say it quickly. For you, God, with fire you consumed her, and with fire you will rebuild her. Are we rebuilding? No. God, you rebuild. Right? You destroyed it, you rebuild it, and you'll take care of it. That's the 19th, 20th century. Right? I mean, Hanukkah was remade into a Zionist holiday. It's not about sufganiyot. There was a time when it actually had substance to it. All right? No, but for the Zionists, it was a major thing to take Hanukkah back. They thought they were restoring it to its original thing. Okay, so just to summarize, because we're getting near the end, and I know I'm between you and dinner, so that's a very dangerous position to be in. What did the rabbis do? They spiritualized the attachment to the land. Okay, you face Jerusalem during prayer. You don't rush to go to Jerusalem. You face Jerusalem. Isaiah Gafni, in a book called Land, Center, and Diaspora, has a whole article on now Jews want to be buried in the land. Let me tell you, Jews who are buried in the land, they can't revolt. It's built into the system that if you're buried there, you can't revolt, right? But it is, by the way, a utopian messianism. I'll be there to rise from the dead when the Messiah comes, right? It's a very quiescent messianism. And very, very important, the rabbis say Torah is the supreme value to maintain Jewish identity in the diaspora, which was already something that existed. So the process that was begun in the Second Temple period was now complete. The land is out. The law is in. It replaces it. And the connection to the land is entirely religious and spiritual. It's not political. It is not, I would say, actual in the sense of sovereignty, okay? You do not have to reside in the land. There's a preference for it. You get to do certain things. But the idea that you could be a full Jew individually outside the land, that is tolerated. There are differences of opinions in the Gemara, but overall, this is a major, major move. It's not political, and it's the Babylonian Jewry can now really take off because there's no preference for being in Israel. So what I call it the pacification of the Jewish attachment. You emphasize the biblical notion of conditional covenant. Return to Zion depends on Jewish performance of commandments. Right, that was the Sinai covenant. Emphasize utopian messianism. Emphasize Hanukkah's miracle of the oil, not the military victory. And continue spiritualizing or religifying the attachment to the land. This becomes core to Rabbinic Judaism. It is extremely, should we say, portable, Karen? Karen? Okay. All right. No, but it is. In other words, because now I could be religiously connected to the land if I live in Germany, if I live in Russia, if I live in India, right, and if I live in South Africa. And this was the rabbis' greatness because they said the military, right, political efforts are killing us. There won't be any Jews left to survive, to come back, whenever that time will be. Now, the religious approach of the rabbis continues and continues and continues and continues because there's no reason to change it. There's no pressure. There's no force that's saying, no, there's another way of looking at it until the 19th century. Okay? So our key concepts were covenant, land as center, and messianism. And the implications are political. So what's going to be the political implication of this strategy? Lie low. Right? Wait till the crises pass. Wait for God to do this, but don't stir up any problems with the sovereign nations. Religious, push Torah, push observance. Don't push the need to be in Israel. Educational, and this is subtle, much more emphasis on rabbinic texts than on Tanakh. Because the story of Tanakh is the story of the Jews in their land and war and political sovereignty. And it ends with Ezra and Nehemiah. It's not as important as Gemara and as Tanakh. As Halacha, Shulchan Aruch. Right? You have to know how to observe, because this is the way we're going to get back. Not by reading the stories about King David. And what do the Zionists do? What's the curriculum of the Zionists? Tanakh. Tanakh. Ben Gurion loved Tanakh. He had a class in the Prime Minister's residence every other Saturday night or once a month on Tanakh. You can read the records. He was a great scholar. He would walk around the land with the Tanakh, with the Jewish Bible. That's why he could say, I say on behalf of the Jews, this is the Peel Commission, which you'll learn about. The Bible is our mandate. The Bible which was written by us in our language, in Hebrew, in this very country. That is our mandate. It was only recognition of this right which was expressed in the Balfour Declaration. And I agree with that 100%, because as you read Tanakh, you see that idea of the conditional covenant was there. But after the Bar-Kochba Revolt, after 3 bruising defeats at the hands of the Romans, the rabbi said, if we're going to survive for another day, we've got to shift the emphasis. Zionism, political Zionism, has a very difficult time with classical rabbinic Judaism. And this is why. Because in that critical 2nd and 3rd centuries, the rabbi said, we're going to survive. And it's not by getting back to the land as soon as possible. The Zionists said, we have a different vision. So the loggerheads between the religious and the secular Zionists, and also, how will there be something called religious Zionists? Now it sounds like an oxymoron. But that too is a wonderful story to tell. Even though I presented this in relatively stark terms, because I do think, certainly with early Zionism in the late 19th century, there was a lot of conflict between the religious and the Zionists. And could there be something called, a détente between Zionism and the religious? It's something worth looking at. But I just want you to see, it's an evolving story. Even today, I would argue that the majority of Israelis have a different connection to their own land than the Zionists of 100 years ago. So the story is constantly evolving, even among the religious. Within the last 120 years, it's evolving. So it's a wonderful thing that you have a week to hear Ken and all the wonderful presenters that are here, the many, many sessions that you'll get. It's a very, very rich story, but this was just by way of background. This is why Rashi, this is why Maimonides, this is why Dona Gracia, they felt like they were great Jews because they had a spiritual connection to the land. They didn't have to be there. Have a wonderful night.